Hello, my name is Shanna O'Toole. I am the president of Clause 40 Foundation, a nonpartisan nonprofit named after the part of Magna Carta in which the promise of due process was first enshrined in document form in the 13th century. We believe that the erosion of procedural due process rights is preventing the advancement of this country and all of its people. We feel a moral imperative to rebalance the nation's criminal legal system by preserving the due process rights guaranteed in our Constitution through public education, events, research, litigation, and advocacy. Thank you for joining us for the finale of our series on transforming prosecution. For the past 8 weeks, we've been presenting an advanced screening of episodes of the PBS docuseries Philly DA, and then hosting online panel discussions that we hope have helped our audience learn more about the fault lines in our legal system, learned more about our collective failings, but also, hopefully, have also learned more about the data-driven solutions that could lead us all to success, prosperity, increased humanity, and increased safety. During our 8-week panel series, we've been joined by dozens of experts from every possible criminal justice field and every perspective imaginable, discussing a wide range of topics, including how can we address police and prosecutorial misconduct? What do alternatives to an incarceration premised system look like? How do we rethink parole and probation systems? How can we prevent systemic racism from infecting our system's processes? What do we do about the crisis in our criminal juvenile system? And how do we prevent and respond to police brutality? We've heard from public defenders, criminal defense lawyers, civil rights lawyers, criminologists, law professors, reform advocates, community activists, formerly incarcerated persons, crime victim and survivor specialists, and former police officers. And tonight, we hear from the prosecutors themselves. For this evening's event, we're lucky enough to be joined by a vanguard of several current prosecutors who are each in their own ways trying to do something new. They're trying to transform how the prosecutorial function operates in their community. And we're very grateful they've joined us for an intimate discussion regarding their triumphs and their ongoing challenges. Before I introduce our panelists for this evening, I'd like to note that Clause 40 Foundation does not participate in or intervene in any political campaign on behalf of or in opposition to any candidate for public office. The Philly DA docuseries from PBS, ITVS, and Independent Lens concerns one particular office's prosecutorial approach, and we are presenting it to the public as part of an educational campaign on transforming the prosecutorial role to ensure a fairer and more effective criminal legal system. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing our guests. Rachael Rollins is the District Attorney of Suffolk County, Massachusetts. That's Boston, people. She took office in 2019. She is the first woman ever elected as District Attorney in Suffolk County and the first woman of color ever elected District Attorney in the state of Massachusetts. An attorney for over 20 years, DA Rollins previously worked as a federal prosecutor at the United States Attorney's Office in Boston. She also served as general counsel for the Massachusetts Department of Transportation and the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, and as chief legal counsel for the Massachusetts Port Authority. José Garza is the District Attorney of Travis County, Texas. He was elected in November 2020. He is a former federal public defender, immigration rights activist, and leader of the systemic change organization Workers' Defense Project. José has a multifaceted perspective on the criminal legal system and its impact on communities. Parisa Dehghani-Tafti is the Commonwealth's attorney for Arlington County and the city of Falls Church, Virginia. She was first elected to a 4-year term in November 2019. Parisa comes to the office with a 20-year record of criminal legal reform as an innocence protection attorney, a public defender, and a law professor. And we're also thrilled and honored to be joined by the star of PBS's docuseries, Larry Krasner. As I believe all of you will know by now, he is the District Attorney for Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He was first elected to his first 4-year term in November 2017. Larry comes to the office with a 30-year commitment to social justice as a criminal defense attorney, a civil rights lawyer, and a public defender. And moderating tonight's discussion, we have someone almost as impressive as DA Krasner and our other esteemed guests, my husband, Tim O'Toole. In addition to being my spouse, Tim has a few other achievements I will briefly mention. He is one of Clause 40 Foundation's current board members. He is also the leader of Miller & Chevalier's White Collar Practice Defense Group in Washington, D.C. Prior to joining Miller & Chevalier, Tim served as the chief of the Special Litigation Division of the Public Defender Service for the District of Columbia. And prior to that, Tim served the public as a former assistant federal public defender in Las Vegas, Nevada, where he handled many matters for people under sentence of death in federal proceedings. Tim, the floor is yours. Let's have some real talk.
Thanks, Anna, and I'm so excited about this panel. I'm going to do my best to stay out of the way as this goes on, but I hope we're going to have a very good discussion, and I want to get started by throwing out a question about the role of the prosecutor. So throughout tonight's episode, there were references to what a prosecutor should do and what a prosecutor was supposed to be. And so at the beginning of the episode, there was a woman who told Larry, you better go back and take a look at your job description. And then at another point, there was a scene with a city councilman who was trying to provide a job description to Larry. And he said something along the lines of the system of justice, whether we like it or not, is based on roles. And the role of the prosecutor is to present vigorous prosecution. That's how our system works. So the first question that I'll throw out is for each of you in 2 sentences or less, maybe more. Can you discuss what's the proper role of the prosecutor?
Well, I'll jump in, Tim, and let me just point out that for 400 years in this country, we have been electing or in some form or fashion putting people in the position of being a prosecutor who had one kind of background. That is, people who had spent their entire career, their entire lives as prosecutors. And we can all see what the result has been for our criminal justice system. We have more incarcerated people in our country than any other place on earth. And it's had devastating consequences for communities of color, for working class communities, and almost zero impact on the rate of violent crime in this country. So all of us with you today, I think, have been elected to fundamentally transform what the role of the prosecutor is. And ultimately, our communities have spoken about what it should be. Here in Austin, Texas, in Travis County, our community has been clear that they want a criminal justice system that lifts up working class communities and communities of color, not one that just locks people up. They want true public safety that's rooted in stability, in the ability for people to get good jobs, have access to good schools, have access to good healthcare. And so no small task in front of all of us.
Anybody else want to jump in? I was struck tonight by there was one point where it really did seem that the view of an entire crowd of people was that prosecutors should just be tough, that is their job. And the city councilman said it, I think, best when he said, vigorous prosecution. I think what he meant was you just get the maximum sentence in every case. I mean, why isn't that the role of the prosecutor?
Well, I feel like, or that's the way the system works, right? The way it works to the benefit of some and not all, right? And so what has fundamentally changed, to jump on what Jose said, is there are people with lived experiences currently in these roles. There are people that have been criminal defense attorneys, that have visited jails, possibly like myself, not as a criminal defense attorney, but as a sibling of somebody who has been, I have siblings that have been in our local, state, and federal criminal systems. I know personally how much power we have as prosecutors prior to even a jury finding you guilty or prior to you pleading to something, the ability to take away your liberty in that moment. So I think the job description has changed. And that's okay, right? Like if we were in any other profession, job descriptions change all the time. You don't want an executive administrative assistant who can type 30 word, whatever it was when my great grandmother was doing that job. We want to adapt to the times of what this system is. And so for me, I say out loud, I believe we are the Uber to the taxi industry. We are the Airbnb to the hotel industry. And the hotel industry and taxi industry in this analogy is the sort of person Jose spoke about. Like, I've never been to the actual communities where all these crimes are occurring because I live in this part over here and we're protecting us from them. And what's fascinating is the thems are now in the position of power. So I'm okay with saying, you know, yes, that is how the system worked, and it's working exactly the way it was set up to work. And that's why we are dismantling it or changing it or tinkering quite a bit so that it is fair and equitable and just. And I will end with this. We're not pulling your privilege ceiling down to our floor. We're pulling our floor up to your ceiling, right? So as long as we can change that mindset, and by the way, when you are thinking that way, marinate in that for a moment, because that's your privilege and entitlement, saying like, but the system works for me really well right now, and I don't want all of these other people getting the benefit too.
So I'm just going to jump a little bit, if I can, on the what Rachel said about power, because I think that to prosecute is first, last, and always about restraint and modesty. And being a prosecutor comes with an immense amount of power. And that has to be tempered not just with personal modesty, but institutional restraint. So for me, being a prosecutor isn't about adopting any particular policy. It's really about placing institutional constraints on the office itself. So like the reason for eliminating cash bail, you know, isn't because we want to be nice. It's because so eliminating our ability to jail people just because they can't pay their way out places an institutional restraint on the office. And that institutional restraint is that we can't use their freedom to bargain and get a plea deal. The reason for abolishing the death penalty or not charging capital murder is good, because we're eliminating our ability to charge a capital offense. And by doing that, we're placing an institutional restraint on the office. So we can't use the death literally as leverage to get a guilty plea. The same with mandatory minimums. You know, it's really constraining our ability to automatically condemn people with lengthy sentences. And that produces an institutional restraint on the office. When Larry, in one of the episodes, fought to limit the number of years people are on probation, he was placing an institutional restraint on the office, the power to check and monitor and oversee what people are doing. And so, like, for the way I look at it is, how can anybody be against institutional restraint for prosecutors, whether you're a conservative or a liberal or a libertarian? Like, how can you be comfortable with an office that has so much unconstrained power that they can use it to coerce people into giving up their freedom? And the only people I think that can possibly be comfortable with that kind of all-powerful prosecutor are really authoritarians.
I did want to jump in there, and I'm going to throw it over to Larry because he was the one who was asked for his job description. But I think a lot of you got at this point about discretion and the fact that you're using your discretion in a different way. And one of the things that struck me from all these people who wanted to talk about kind of what the role of the prosecutor was is that it didn't seem like there was any room for discretion. And so as long as your discretion was being exercised in a way that was to get the maximum penalty in every case and to charge every case and to basically just throw as many resources at putting people in jail as you could, that's okay. But if you use your discretion to do anything else, then that's not the role of the prosecutor. I mean, did you go back and look at your job description, Larry? And what did you see when you looked at it?
So funny you say that, because there is actually an oath that I took as a prosecutor. And it was two things: uphold the Constitution and seek justice. It was not be as mean and nasty as possible. It was uphold the Constitution, which traditional prosecutors don't do. And it was to seek justice, which we all know traditional prosecutors don't do. That's how we ended up with the most incarcerated country in the world, where we can't fund our public schools. And yet we claim to be the land of freedom. I mean, honestly, traditional prosecutors have made this country a living lie, which is not where we should be. So that is my job description. It's just that, you know, a lot of ambitious people have capitalized on a politics and a media based on fear and based on what is fundamentally dog whistles and racism and also classism. And they've taken advantage of it. You know, I do think that there's another way to talk about this. It's not part of the oath, but it is that one of our highest goals is to avoid the next victimization. sometimes that means you decide that, Charles Manson needs to actually stay in jail for a very, very, very long time and not leave. Sometimes it means that. And sometimes it means that you should make a decision that, excuse me, that's my political consultant right here. But sometimes it means that you should make a decision to give someone probation instead of jail time, or a misdemeanor instead of a felony. And sometimes you should divert them, and sometimes you should not charge them at all, as when we decided to stop charging sex workers, right? That's how you avoid the next victimization. And this one size fits all, give everybody a million years, hang them high approach has been a complete failure in every respect there. So, I did actually look at my job description. It was the one that I had to hold up my hand and swear to. It was to seek justice. It wasn't to wreck everything. It was to seek justice and uphold the Constitution. I think that's what all of us are doing.
And Tim, if we follow through what the police and that crowd wants, they want us to rubber stamp everything the police do. That's what they're asking us. Like, we arrest them, put them in jail. It's like, well, name me another profession on the planet Earth where you get it right 100% of the time, right? Overwhelming majority of police officers aren't lawyers, right? If they're not giving us the evidence or the documents that we need, as you heard in one of the episodes, I'm not fluent, but in one of the many episodes of Philly DA, of like, we don't have documentation to support this, or some of these police reports aren't written in a way that any of us would move forward on these cases. But I find it fascinating that police use their discretion every single day, and so do judges. And in Massachusetts, our judges aren't elected. And I like to say neither of those people are elected. The people of Suffolk County had nothing to do with who their police officers are, nor did they have anything to do with who their judges are. You need to know one person to be a judge in Massachusetts, the governor or the lieutenant governor, who then whisks you through the JNC and you're on the bench. We were elected. We were all honest about who we were going to be, and we all won overwhelmingly on this platform of, we aren't going to do it that way any longer. We are going to use our discretion. The last thing is to your point, Tim, nobody cared about prosecutorial discretion when we were on a freight train going 300 miles an hour toward everyone going to jail. It's only that now people that, have different backgrounds or different surnames or look differently are saying, yeah, now I'm using my discretion to pull up the emergency brake and Tokyo drift around and start going back this way, that people now say it's a problem. And who is this person?
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and we've all seen it. As people from the defense community and from the progressive community and from the criminal legal reform community, we've all seen that the system has so many problems, and we've spent a lot of time talking about it. I know back when I worked with Parisa a ways back, we would talk about things that were wrong with the criminal justice system. But you guys jumped into the ring and actually are trying to do something about it. And so, first of all, thank you. But second of all, has it been harder than you thought it would be? Talk about how hard, maybe it hasn't, but talk about how hard it's been and some of the problems that you might have seen that you didn't expect. You want to start that, Parisa?
You're on mute, Parisa.
Sorry about that. Yeah, it's hard. And it's really hard. And one of the moments that rang true for me when I was watching the documentary was Larry's comments about pirates. And that's actually how some people see us. As we said at the beginning, I come from a defense background. I've been a public defender. I've been an innocence protection attorney. I'd never been a prosecutor. And so I know a lot of people saw me and still see me, as they see all of us, as a pirate. So yeah, it's hard. But if the thrust of your question is, which institution has been the biggest implement to reform? I'm going to be really impolitic and say that it's the judiciary. And because I think that judges like to think of themselves as the ultimate guardians of the system. And since that system has permitted them to sit at the top of their profession, it must by definition then be a good system. So it's sometimes those people who benefited the most from the way things are that are the most unable to see how and when it needs to change. So I would say the bench has been harder even than the police in my opinion, because a lot of police are used to, as Rachel said, you exercising discretion, and they do see what goes on, and they see what the things that are wrong with what their colleagues are doing. They want a lot of them want to do better, and just are saying, tell me what I need to do to make sure this search is okay, and tell me what I need to do it right. But the bench has been really just the hardest part of all of this.
And I wanted to go to Rachel on this, because you mentioned already you had judges who were not elected, and you are representing a very different constituency. It seems like that's been an issue that Parissa's run to. I think the judges are appointed by the General Assembly in Virginia, but they're still appointed. Compare the judges and the police, I guess, Rachel, in Boston, and what type of impediments you've seen from them, if any.
Yeah. So what are judges? Overwhelmingly former prosecutors. And what this panel of people are saying is mass incarceration in the last 3, 4, 5 decades haven't worked. So every day, if you wake up and you see Larry's face and Parissa's face and José's face saying, we're the new, Justice League that is trying to right all of these wrongs, you're the wrong as the judge, right? Like if you're the former prosecutor, because overwhelmingly, at least in Massachusetts, and I'd love to hear if it's different in Virginia, Texas, or Pennsylvania, I'm sorry. It was not until very recently we started the good practice of appointing defense attorneys to the bench, right? Appointing people that were activists or had worked at the ACLU. And I'm not talking about Article 3 judges. I'm talking about, state judge appointments there. The judiciary, it's been hard, but we've been really deliberate, Tim, about making sure that we are bringing the right case so that we win, right? And so every time we have fought the judiciary, we have won. We brought it up in Massachusetts. It's called a 211-3, an emergency petition up to our SJC. My first year, we had to do it 2 or 3 times. We won each one. And it's that sort of, like, be careful who you punch in the face. You don't know who that person is. They could look like Parisa and be an MMA fighter for all you know, right? And you chose the wrong one, because every time it's happened, we've won here. I will say the judiciary, I will say the media, right? The media loves this old sort of trope of tough on crime, tough on crime. A lot of our writers for the Globe and the Herald are 60, 70 years old. All of their sources are former police officers, right? I would say not necessarily as much the police as the police unions. My office, right? I don't know about all of these. Larry, his predecessor was indicted, and so but no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to laugh at that, Larry. But for me, I beat a person that was beloved in the former chief of the gang unit in my office. Every time I walked into a forum, I walked through all of my current staff right now, right? So walking into an office, and if I had an office of 25 people, yeah, I could have fired all of them and started that first day with 25 new people and maybe implemented everything immediately. But I have a 350 person or so office that I had to really work hard on that culture. Last thing I'll say is our peers, right? In Massachusetts, my 10 other DAs, we are sadly in an arranged marriage that I would love very much to get out of, right? If I could, but all of our funding for our IT comes through the MDAA because of some legislative function. I would have Larry Krasnered my way out of this entity within minutes of taking my oath, but I couldn't. And then the last thing is as we've seen, the president of the United States is talking about Larry Krasner, right? The attorney general of the former president of the United States, former AG, are talking about us. So we're getting it from everywhere. And then we saw even the people that elect us are saying, you aren't doing enough, right? Which of course makes the people that oppose us say, see, they don't even like them. So it's coming from every single angle.
Same dynamic, Jose?
Well, I think all of us here came into these offices standing on the shoulders of regular people, of communities that have borne the brunt of these failed practices and policies for, as Rachel pointed out, for decades. And for the last several decades have been suffering, have been organizing, have been slowly building power, sounding the alarm about the direction our system was going, about the impact it was having for them and their families. And it is ultimately that people power, the fact that so many people sacrificed, marched, made phone calls, organized on our behalfs, that we are here in these positions. And I think one of our responsibilities as elected prosecutors is to ensure that every day we step into the arena, as you put it, that those tens of thousands of people step into the arena with us. But in order for them to do that, they have to know what's happening. They have to, we have to intentionally work to make sure that they are in the loop about what's happening in our courtrooms, what our law enforcement is doing, so that they can be part of the conversation, part of the decision making, and ultimately part of ensuring that we all do what we've been sent here to do. And translating what happens in every case on any given day, it's a real responsibility. I was thinking about in the last episode, there's a scene when someone on Larry's team says to one of y'all's allies in the movement, "You can't call us to the mat on every single case." And I think though that tension is something I'm sure we all work hard to get right, to make sure that that, be that as it may, that the people who brought us here stay with us in the room for these fights that we have to have.
So I want to jump on that last point, Jose, and throw it to Larry on this, because I know he talked about it a lot during the series. The system has gone wrong for many, many, many years. I mean, it's hundreds of years building up a system that got to where it is today with mass incarceration and some other problems that we'll talk about. What's it like in terms of the expectations to fix the problem within a week or a year or a few years? I mean, how have you dealt with those sorts of expectations? Because it's basically like, yeah, we screwed it up for 100 years, but if you haven't fixed it in a week, then these policies don't work, and we've proven that they don't work.
So, I think it's a great question. I have very frequently analogized what we are doing to social justice movements. And I did that because I used to represent a lot of protesters, had to study their movements to defend them. And in criminal court, because that's what we do with nonviolent protests, we arrest it. Thank you, traditional prosecutors, doesn't that say it all? But anyway, so, I think actually the news is really good, but we have to determine the yardstick. The yardstick here is that this, like any other great social movement, takes decades. And I am fond of saying 30 years because it seems to be something I saw as I read some of the histories. If it takes 30 years, if we're 10 years in, we got 20 years to go. So then what is the success in 1 year or 4 years to get to this point where there's been this giant victory in this battle? And then, of course, as with all social movements, it goes on. You can't expect to get it all done in a year. To me, the amazing thing, though, is for all the noise and all the heat that we get, we are achieving so much. For example, in Philly, in the space of 3 years, we cut in half the future years of incarceration that were being generated by the Philly court. 3 years, 3 years, 3 years. If you're talking about a 30-year trajectory, that's amazing. If you look at, supervision on probation and parole, Philly was the worst of the 10 biggest cities. We cut that by 2/3 in 3 years, right? So we can listen to the noise, or we can realize what is behind the noise. What's behind the noise is that we are getting enormous things done in sweeping ways and very quickly. And that's why they're so damn angry. That's why your institutional media can't adapt. That's why some of your judiciary can't adapt. And yeah, there are actually good people in all these institutions, and some of them are very much with us. So to some extent, when they talk about how hard it is, my instinctive reaction is no, actually, we are mopping the floor with these people. And the reason it seems hard is they're yelling and screaming and carrying on like 2-year-olds because we're mopping the floor with them. That is what's happening here. I believe that that's true. And I also believe it's an important way to look at it, because a lot of people talk about us as progressive prosecutors. And frankly, some of us are left out here. I mean, everyone who's on this call was either elected at the same time as I was or shortly thereafter. Some people who got there before us and have been reelected are not on this call. Marilyn Mosby in Baltimore, Kim Foxx in Chicago, Aramis Ayala. These are all people who took some very courageous stands. They went up for reelection, at least in 2 cases. And that the third's not going up just because she's going to run for something even more exciting. But they went up for reelection. There was nothing but napalm and bombs falling on them through those elections, and they won those elections. Needless to say, I'm a little fixated on this because I have an election in about 2 days. But and they won those things, right? So is it really that hard when you not only do these incredibly courageous things before we did, but then you got reelected? Is it really that hard just because there's a lot of noise and ripping and roaring carrying on? Isn't the noise proof that we're getting something done? So maybe it's not that hard.
I guess to follow up on that, is there anything about this that's been easier than you expected? So, a lot of the episodes talked about the cash bail and reforming cash bail. I mean, it seemed like that one, you had some pushback from activists along the way. You had some pushback from the judiciary even more along the way, basically trying to thread that middle path between them. That seemed pretty hard. Were there other things that were much smoother than you expected?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say our issue with cash bail is probably the most difficult one because it requires a legislative solution. It requires that we have in Philly what they have in DC, and no, nothing's perfect, but in DC, you either get held or you get out, and money's got nothing to do with it. And that's what we need. If those were the alternatives offered to judges and bail commissioners in Philadelphia with an orderly, logical, careful system, our results would be much better than one that makes mistakes by holding poor people in jail for no good reason because they can't pay a couple bucks, and letting out people who pose real dangers to society just because they have resources. And that's what we have, right? So that has been difficult because that's been a situation in which the prosecution is missing what I view as a very necessary tool in the toolbox. And we can't unilaterally end it. We've tried to simulate it, emulate it, persuade, study it, and we've made tremendous progress on keeping broke people out of jail for little stuff. But we're having much more difficulty, some of it pandemic related, a lot of it just cultural, much more difficulty saying, excuse me, that person shot someone in the spine. That's really, really bad. And that person has a long record, and it's clear there's retaliation going on here. They should be held, and having judges agree with that. It's a system in Pennsylvania that's drunk on money for municipalities, money for private bail bonds people. And it's pretty clear it's nothing we're going to be able to completely fix on our own, even though we are making progress.
Rachel, I wanted to jump in and ask you, how frustrating is it that when you're fighting these fights, the other side doesn't have any data and they're just coming in and making arguments? And I mean, how frustrating is that? And then how?
Oh my God, I think why am I is this how I die? Did you see that every light just went off in my house? My kids, I think, are doing something upstairs. So I'm going to pretend to be nice, but I'm going to yell at them for. All right, sorry, go ahead. You were saying no data. Yes. What I love is that, to Larry's point, the FOP will stand up and say things with not a single scintilla of data or information. There's not an annotation for miles, and they just say something. And we, on the other hand, every document I put out has like 7 footnotes, right? I have, an avatar that jumps out and says like, I once did this. It's very, very frustrating. It's very, very frustrating. But to Larry's point, you focus. Like, the frustration is what they want you to feel. They want to scatter us. They want us to be like one of Larry's beautiful cats, right? Looking anytime anything happens, we are taking the bait. We have to keep our eyes on the prize and keep moving forward, because to his point, I think they're terrified. I just love to make 2 other points that they hate hearing is whenever you know, I won when I won and they said, you know, the police weren't supporting you, whatever. And I said, right, none of the Boston police live in Boston. So, you know, their opinion is, which is part of the problem, by the way, right? Because you live in these other communities, drive into our community, police us, and then go back to where you're from, which is a significant problem. And I will say the thing that was easier than I expected is I stopped doubting myself. Not that I, believe me, I don't suffer much from like needing confidence, but there were these moments. I had a case that I inherited, the Sean Ellis murder in Boston of a, Sean Ellis was alleged to have murdered a Boston police detective. And one of the biggest cases we've had back in 1993 was up for his 4th trial. And against my entire office, I was very, very confident about the fact that I would no longer allow my name on any of those pleadings, and our name is on every one of those pleadings, to in any way stand in support of the massive corruption, like criminality, federal indictments and other things of police officers that had injected themselves throughout. So what is easier than I expected is just looking at my team after they do their work and present and say, like, I hear you. Is that everything? Okay, this is what we're doing and we're moving forward. And then not doubting yourself, even when you're standing out alone, because I guarantee you these other 3, I know they've had to do it so many times, likely before they jumped up and said, I'm going to run for office, but certainly in this role.
Well, let's talk about something that I think you all have had to do, and that is change the culture. I mean, as I understand it, you guys are all in your first term, although hopefully there'll be many more. But you're all in your first term, and so you took over from a prosecutor's office that had a very different philosophy, I think, in all of your cases. How did you change the culture? Why did you need to change the culture? And realistically, I mean, how long does it take to change the culture in an office? Parisa, you want to start that one?
Sure. I mean, I have the easiest out of everybody because I have fewer than 20 attorneys. And both Larry and Rachael gave me advice that was invaluable, which was to get my own leadership team. And I did, and we replaced about half of the attorneys. And we talk a lot about everything. And so it's been a lot easier for me than, because I'm in constant communication with each and every one of them. I was able to personally vet everybody who stayed on. But at the same time, you know, it's change is a process, even for me. And, you know, we have to spend a lot of time, and we do, like, decoupling the notion of incarceration with justice, because people fall into that habit so easily. And so I've literally rewritten assistants' arguments at sentencing and said, like you cannot say this. Like, you cannot say we're only going to get justice with this number of years of incarceration. And I have the luxury of doing that because I don't have 200 attorneys. But that's actually been, for us, the easiest part. The hardest part in terms of culture change is really what I think the sort of courthouse. Some of it is, you know, sort of defense attorneys not really knowing what they're supposed to do now in terms of like what information to present. And you know, we sort of find ourselves, like, sometimes we're the ones making the mitigation arguments, which I don't think anybody likes, but and the media, because it's, you know, it's really boring to say 99 out of the 100 people that were released, you know, without not on cash bail, you know, picked up their kids and, you know, wrote a resume and, you know, studied for their GED. That is a super boring story. The exciting story is the one person who, you know, went and did something terrible. And so, when you look at the reporting around New York, the Wall Street Journal reported that in 2020, homicides rose dramatically, 45% in a year, from 319 to 452. But what it doesn't tell you is that when Giuliani left office in 2001, the homicides were 649 that year. And the lower the homicide rate drops, the more dramatic any increase looks. They don't tell you that. And they don't tell you that on a 30-year timeline, they are still historically low. They're still less than a third of what they were 30 years ago. So, the culture change that I've had the most difficulty with is media and the judiciary. So inside of the office, again, I've been really blessed because the office is small, and I really have brought in my philosophy background, right, to every single lunch discussion, and the attorneys sort of gather around this area outside of my office. And anytime you walk into the office around 1 o'clock, there's going to be a bunch of attorneys standing there debating something about a case. And it's fun. It reflects my personality. And I think that in that way, we've really done a seismic shift in the culture.
Rachael and Jose, we watched Larry. A lot of the last episode was Larry kind of recruiting in a new class. I think it ended, or near the end was the first class that had been fully recruited by his office, and there were a number of recruiting trips that had led to that. I mean, have you all tried to really change the culture through that sort of recruiting, or how, if not, how have you tried to do it?
Well, I mean, I want to agree with Parisa that it really does, on some level, start at the top with your leadership team. And it's been important to make sure that our leadership team reflects the aspirations of our community, both in their experiences and just as professionals and as humans, in who and what they are. And we have also worked hard, and it's been difficult in the midst of a pandemic, but to spend lots of time with our attorneys. We have near weekly trainings on Friday afternoons, spend a lot of time, as much as we can, staffing cases together so that we can walk through facts, walk through the law together, and begin to learn, in a communal way, what it is our community expects from us. But I also think that, that the larger challenge we have is changing the culture, as Parisa said, not just in our offices, but in institutions beyond our offices and in our community. I mean, the fact is that for 400 years, we've all been told that what public safety is just locking up as many working class people and people of color as we can. We've been told that if we want to feel safe, that's what we have to do. And through our own experiences, through our own lived experiences, we know that's not true. We know what public safety is. We know that it's stability. We know that it's the things that help communities be stable. But as Parisa said, that's not as neat and tidy a headline. And so the real work I think all of us have ahead of us is to change that broader culture. And to answer your question finally, yes, absolutely, young people help because they believe it's all still possible, and it is, because they don't, it's not the way they've always done things, and it's just as crazy to them as it is to us. And so, yeah, we have also, we were blown away by the size of Larry's new class. I think we'll be recruiting, somewhere on the magnitude of 3 to 5 new attorneys. But yes, we've been hitting the pavement. I talked to the person who was leading our recruitment yesterday, and he was excited about a candidate. And he said, she told me that basically it would be a cold day in hell before she ever became a prosecutor. And I told him, Ricky, that's our person. That's exactly the kind of person we want on our team. Larry's got cats. I've got a daughter handing me this character from Frozen. So my political consultant. So Olaf, thank you. So absolutely. Our, as Larry said, our future is bright, and we've just got to bring, it's our job to help those young, talented attorneys who see themselves as civil rights attorneys, who see themselves as defense lawyers into the fold.
Yeah, I would love to add that, like, I think one of the things I'm most proud of is when I inherited my office, the top 12 people in the office were 10 men, 2 women, all white. They were excellent at their jobs. Very, like on paper, very great, not reflective of Suffolk County and certainly the people who come in contact most often with our office. As of right now, for our executive team, we're over 55 people, 55% of those 12 or 11 people are people of color. We have 2 Black men in leadership positions. My chief of staff is a member of the AAPI community. We have survivors of homicide. My first assistant is a survivor of homicide himself. First woman general counsel in the history of our office. We have a licensed independent clinical social worker running our VWA program. We've also put a huge amount of money into training, because all of these policies mean nothing if I just hand you a stack of policies and say, like, read at your own leisure, right? And don't have the constant, like, weekly almost. And that's one of the things I learned from Larry's team when I met with them shortly after I was fortunate enough to get this job, was that literally weekly they have trainings, right, on Larry's policies. And now, of course, they're rolling out different things. We instituted core values that are on the top of every one of our letterhead, right? And so just to sort of remind people the kind of not just marketing piece, but to their cores, remember that our 5 core values are help heal, be brave, serve humbly, respect everyone, work smart. And, if you are in a bind and can't pull out the Rollins memo, if you can remember those 5 things and are trying to respond in a way that is consistent with those, that's helpful. And then the most important part to me, to hearing Jose say, and I love it, I want our office to reflect the community that we have the privilege of serving, right? And although I have to be better with respect to my ADAs that we're hiring, there's not as much diversity there. We are working to make sure they are incredibly culturally competent. We are mandating that they visit, for example, the Suffolk County House of Corrections, which is where people are sent if they're detained, either through a bail or certainly in a homicide, right? Where they are not bail eligible, they will be held pending trial. But we want people to have actually set foot in a place where they are going to be able to send somebody having never been there before themselves. We have survivors, we have criminal defense attorneys, we have all these panels that are speaking with them and training them. And the last thing I'm doing is we're going to make sure that our Brady training and our other important trainings are done with the public defenders, because I feel like there is too much adversarial. I get it in Superior Court, maybe, but I feel like in our municipal and district courts, our low-level community courts in Suffolk County, we are working together on, assisting people that are overwhelmingly, as we all know, mental health crisis, substance use disorder, food or housing insecurity, or just straight up homelessness, where we should be banding together to try to get the services and treatment these individuals need. So, but all of that, Tim, is above and beyond the job we're doing, right? Like the cases, the however many, I only have 30,000 new cases or so a year. I think Larry has 2-3 times as many as that, right? Where we are also, Parisa, I've rewritten arguments too. And what we have to do is make sure that, I think the biggest problem with our system is we don't have an audit function, right? We don't have somebody walking in and pulling a case and saying, Did this case work the way that DA Krasner would have wanted it to? Did this case work exactly what José's policies are saying that they should have done? Did it happen there? And I think we have good checks and balances because many of us come from the community or were elected, and more people have my cell phone number than I would put together every one of the 15 DAs before me. The community didn't have their numbers, but we need an audit function to be better. But I think culture change is one of the most important things I'm doing in this role.
That's great. So I want to pivot now. A number of you have touched on it. Rachel, you just talked about diversity, and you talked about policing the other, and José, you're talking about the 400 years of problems that the criminal justice system has had. So I want to ask a question about systemic racism, and unfortunately, we don't have enough time to do it justice. But I do want to at least put it on the table and talk about it a little bit, because for 400 years, the response of the criminal legal system to systemic racism has been to deny that it exists, or to claim that it was, if it did exist, that it was the result of a few bad apples. It seems like not only are you guys elected to change that, but you're elected to really make a difference in the entire criminal legal system. And the question that I want to pose here, just because I don't think we have enough time to take on the question in its entirety, is there something about the prosecutorial function in particular that can really focus on eliminating systemic racism in the criminal justice system or making it better? I mean, how do you do that, given the limitations that we talked about before in terms of judges, in terms of the society as a whole? I mean, it's not unique to the criminal justice system, and it's not unique to the prosecutorial function.
Well, I'll go, which feels a little weird, but I mean, I think that we need to do concrete things, and some of those concrete things are collecting data and, you know, sort of following the evidence and really making sure that we are not charging in a way that creates racial disparities, that we're not asking for sentences that create racial disparities. But I think, and, you know, because you're taking sort of a step back, I think the most important thing that we're doing in some ways is actually confronting what I call the origin story of race and crime in America. We're actually confronting the false narrative of Black dangerousness that reaches all the way back to slavery, when Black people were believed not just to be inferior, but also savage brutes. And that's language from 400 years ago. You know, people prone to criminality who needed to be domesticated. It's really important that we are actually talking about this, because without talking about this, whatever reform we do is just going to continue the sort of baked in racial disparities that already exist. Like, we had a reform movement in the 1920s, you know, and we got a more humane, a more fair justice system that was just as racist as it was before. And so I think the most important thing we can do is really confront and talk about, and, you know, not let people forget, you know, both in our sort of themes that we present, and in the stories that we tell, and in the data that we produce, that we are trying to turn this sort of battleship that has, you know, in a different direction. And it takes a lot of work, but I think the most important thing that we're doing is talking about it.
Yeah, I'll just add, I mean, similarly, and with real concrete examples, right? So part of what is so urgent for me is I show up to these trainings. It's not like I want them to hear my voice saying, this is what you need to do in order to work here, right? And I would rather work lean with less of you than keep you all on board and have you continue making errors that are inconsistent. And so an example of that is we just recently filed something on juvenile brain development. And we are trying to follow what the state of Washington has done, which is essentially said 18 to 20-year-olds have individualized sentencing. They have jumped and said that, you know, there is this emerging adult population. Why that's important is in Massachusetts, our death penalty was found unconstitutional by our Supreme Judicial Court, not the legislature. Under Article 26 of our state constitution, they said it's unconstitutional. The seminal case is a case called Watson versus Suffolk County DA's office, or Suffolk County DA's office versus Watson, I'm sorry. And I said, it could not be James Watson, right? And the team, I'm looking at 20 people in my office, and they were like, what do you mean? I'm like, is that the James Watson, the death penalty case that my predecessor was going to execute James Watson that we just exonerated because there were hypnotized witnesses that found James, is it that James Watson? And of course, you ask these questions knowing it is, of course, that effing James Watson. And my entire appeals unit, who's all white, sat there looking at me, and I said, do you see what I'm talking about? Do you see in this moment right now that when you think I'm manic and crazy and telling you that I don't want a single brief filed with the word race in it, you want to write the word brace yourself, I have to approve that because brace has race in it, or trace evidence, I have to approve it because the word race is in there. Nobody's going to be making statements about race in an all-white unit in my office, particularly that impacts my community, without me reviewing it because that's my name on that document. We can't just talk about it. We have to give them real live examples so that if they make a mistake, I have no problem looking at them and saying, like, best of luck working wherever you're working next, because this is that urgent. Like this race piece that we're dealing with that is injected in everything that we do and deeply, deeply matters. So I think exactly what Parisa said, but with real examples, you have to give it to them and then let them be uncomfortable and go back, and then we get back to work the next day.
Wow. So that's great. So I think we're down to the final question, and I do want to throw it first to Larry. Larry, you're the system now, and you're the establishment. I think a lot of tonight's episode was on that. I mean, that's great, and we've talked about all the reasons tonight why that's great, but it also comes with the cost, because these problems that we're talking about tonight are all your problems, and to the extent they continue on your watch, you know, I think you said it tonight in the show, you can become part of the problem. And so, I mean, how hard has it been to accept that? And what do you do to keep yourself from slipping into becoming really part of the system and being part of what got us here?
Well, you know, I think that's the job, right? The job is to recognize that if you carry the power, then you can either be the solution or the problem with every single decision you make. And you make 100 decisions on every case. I mean, honestly, who cares if it's hard? Like this is what we came here for. This was the whole point. If we're not the ones getting it right a lot of the time and making mistakes, it will be Bill Barr. Anybody want Bill Barr to make these decisions? How about Jeff Sessions? He's not doing much. I mean, if Kavanaugh gets tired, how about him? We can't have that. We have to have people struggle, make these decisions that are difficult. You know, people may not realize it, but when a human being walks into a courtroom having committed a serious crime, facing serious time, there is no number written on their forehead in red that is the right number of years. There is no such number, but somebody does have to make these decisions. And I would be much happier to have Parisa and Rachael and José and a whole lot of the people I could name making those decisions than having the people who used to do this. You know, I mean, one of the advantages we have is they set the bar so damn low that even I can jump over that, and I'm not exactly a jumper. That's just how it is. So we have to be willing to do the thing, which is recognize that no matter how imperfect we are, we can't do as badly as the people Richard Nixon would have picked.
And Tim, what's great is we have to remember, like, what I have to keep reminding myself is if I'm right, my office is getting smaller. It's not taking up more space, right? I have to make sure that, as annoying sometimes, and I say this directly to Court Watch and others to say like, oh, you know, they're on Twitter again. But it is this constant state of feeling like you're in this place where not everyone's mad, but like, you know, are you doing the right thing, irrespective of what the result is going to be? But I do think we have to be careful, because there's a time in the beginning where I thought, oh, well, you know, why don't you, I don't want my footprint to get bigger, right? I want the community to have more of a say. I want to be pushing things out of my office, right? Because that's sort of what we're all talking about. And I don't mean for the murders and the rapes and the armed assaults. No, I'm talking about the trespasses and the other sort of quality of life crimes that we saw a lot in the neighborhood in Philly DA, right? We all have that neighborhood in our jurisdiction, but that's the one thing I get worried about with myself, is it's not taking up more space, Rachel. It's when you are successful, when we are prosecuting less, we need less prosecutors, right? And, you know, and I've already started, as a result of the Kims and the Aramises and the Larrys and the others, Maryland's, is hiring data, you know, specialists, hiring licensed independent clinical social workers, right? Hiring those experts from other areas to help make us better.
All right. Well, I think it's a little past the hour, so I think that's going to be the final word. And I see that our host has come in to give the final word. But I just want to thank everybody for what I thought was an amazing discussion.
Thank you, everybody, for your honesty, for your candor. Thank you so much also for your public service. I'm very grateful to all of our viewers for spending your time with us. If any of you are interested in viewing our past panels in our Transforming Prosecution series, you can access them all at clause40.org. We hope we've given you a lot to think about tonight and over the last 8 weeks, and we hope you join the wide and diverse community of Americans who believe that together we can move closer towards justice. Thanks, everyone.